Join me tonight in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter number 6. As we continue on our series, this will make you happy, examining different areas of our life or pursuits we might hold to that we think will bring us satisfaction, fulfillment, contentment, or true happiness. And Solomon, not as a critic, not as a cynic, is trying to help us look at our lives, our pursuits, our motivations through the lens of Bible wisdom and eternal perspective. And so, as we've said in pretty much every message, he's trying to help us see what God in heaven has for us under the sun to operate our lives upon. And so, we look at chapter number 6 tonight. And we looked last week about when good gifts go bad. Just because you have good gifts doesn't mean you will even enjoy good gifts. It doesn't even mean you have the possibility to when you try to enjoy the blessings apart from the benefactor or the blessor. And so we come tonight to chapter number 6, look at verses 7 through 12, what we call verses 7 through 12, as Solomon closes out this section before he moves on to a new idea. And note what he writes here in verse 7. All the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. For what hath the wise more than the fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. That which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? For who knoweth what is good for man in this life? All the days of his vain life which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? Solomon is concluding this section that he's been discussing riches, the pursuit of riches, the attempted enjoyment of riches, by zooming out, if we can say it this way, and he's going to discuss just at the broadest point possible the idea of trying to use labor to bring fulfillment, labor to bring satisfaction. Though he's spoken specifically in regards to riches and wealth or having them and trying to enjoy them, he's speaking at the broad level now of trying to have labor be our fulfillment, laboring for earthly items to bring us some level of satisfaction. And he helps us here by realizing it's just another dead end. All of us, to some degree, know what it is to labor and not find it as fulfilling as we think it would be or should be. I was reading this, I was reminded of a job I had in college. I worked for Nick's Lumber for one whole semester. And while I worked at Nick's Lumber, it was a family-owned hardware lumber store, and so I had many items that I had to accomplish every day. I had to deliver all the lumber and water heaters to Section 8 apartment complexes. That was exciting in and of itself. I had to weed eat the lawn every day because he wanted it weed eated every day. I had to do all the stocking throughout the store, S-T-O-C-K, stocking throughout the store. I had to do that, not like customers are good buy anything, not like that kind of stocking. So I had to do that. But one of the things that just infuriated me for some time was before I left, every time he'd say, "Did you sweep the storehouse?" I'd say, "No." And so early on I learned, quit having him ask me, just do it. But every day I had to go out with a push broom and sweep this, what he called the storehouse. Imagine a massive shed about half this auditorium size, and I had to go sweep it. It's where we cut all the lumber, so there was sawdust everywhere, trash from deliveries and wrappings and this and that. So the place just ended up in one day's time as a pit by the end of it. And so he'd say, "I want it all swept. I don't want nothing on that floor when you leave." And so I'd go back there and broom and broom and broom and broom and feel like it's just unbelievable how long it's taking. And I'm telling you, the last 45 minutes to an hour of my daily shift was brooming out this storehouse. You know what the infuriating part about it was? I'd come in the next morning only to find what all over that floor by the time I got there after class. More trash, more sawdust. And if that weren't enough, the doors that closed in the back that we took the delivery trucks in and out of, that we received, and then we went out with our truck, there was a gap at the bottom of that thing about this. I mean, I think we were just running a cat hotel at some point, and so it's just insane. We had this massive gap. And with Oklahoma winds, just everything blew in there. And so every day I'd sweep it, every morning I'd come back, it was ruined. Every day I'd sweep it, Every morning I come back, it's ruined. And so it just felt, frankly, like a worthless task, a very futile attempt at labor. Solomon's trying to help us not have such an outlook, view, or experience in this life. He's talked specifically about things we chase, thinking they'll bring us satisfaction or fulfillment in the material realm. He's not wanting us to do it on the broad scale because he is pointing out in this passage, it's yet just another dead end. Seeking labor to bring you satisfaction, seeking labor to bring you automatic or true happiness, it cannot and it will not. It is only a blessed byproduct of walking with and serving the Lord. And so tonight he wants to talk to us about a look at our labors, looking at what we're laboring for, what motivates us, what's our end goal, our end result. And he wants us to labor for what lasts, not after earthly longings. That we labor for what lasts and not after earthly longings. Why would he warn us about that? Why would he say that? Well, number one tonight, may we recognize labor's results are lackluster. Labor's results are often lackluster. Look what he says here in verse 7 and 8 as he describes labor. Look what he says. All the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. Solomon warns us, don't think that labor in of itself or labor will bring you to a goal that will get you true happiness. That labor is the means or the pathway to do that, to find this satisfaction in this world, because labor in and of itself is very lackluster. Why do you ask? Because it's in a perpetual loop, this issue of labor and what it yields. Think what he says here in verse 7. All the labor is for your mouth. The totality of our work efforts go towards our daily existence, or maybe I should say the sustaining of our daily existence. Solomon simplifies the discussion on labor, gain, wealth, and even the pursuit to the very basic level we can all understand. You know why you have to labor? Because you have to eat. That's not hard. Everybody in here, all the way to the youngest child, can understand. You're going to have to labor to eat, generally speaking. And though there could be extremes in either case, generally speaking, everyone in human history has needed to, in some capacity, work to be able to provide the ability to have sustenance. But note what he says. You do all this labor, but what's it for? Just for your mouth? But what does it even bring? What does that yield? What does that labor get you? Note what he says. All that labor, and yet the appetite is not filled. Note what he says. Appetite is our motive to labor. If we don't work, we won't have the ability to provide sustenance for ourselves or those in our household. And yet, all of our labor will never produce a lasting satisfaction, will it? It will never produce what we desire. The cravings for food or drink are not satisfied or filled in any final sense whatsoever. All this effort, all this labor to provide food for today, you know what has to happen tomorrow? All over again. It just has to be repeated again. And think about this. Why? It's the nature of our world under the sun. It's the nature of our human existence in a fallen world. I don't know if you can relate to this. I imagine you can. Have you ever pondered how much you spend on groceries in a year? Some of you with teenagers are like, oh, I'm bitter in my soul right now. My dad had to put a moratorium on cereal, like how much we could have, if my mom could even buy it, because my brother and I at one point were going through a box a day on top of 3 meals as well, right? And so some of you with young men in the room or have had young men are like, I know that feeling. And so here it is. You buy these groceries. You have whatever you have budgeted. Maybe you're like a vegan family and you're only eating like $200 a month worth of fruit and nuts or whatever it is you eat. And so this $200, it's still $2,400 a year. And for what? So you could be full for about 6 hours, right? Vegan, more like 2.5. But so like you could be full. If you're in here and you're just like $200 a month, try $200 a week. And some of you in here are probably spending $800 a month on groceries. And do the math, my friend. It gets scary. We're talking some families spending over $10,000 to $12,000 a year in groceries. And for what? So you can eat it, it can provide you fuel for the day, and be disposed of. And that is all that hard-earned labor went towards, was what? Food for today. And you still have to get up and do it tomorrow. It's not going to change. You're going to be hungry tomorrow. You're going to still need that sustenance tomorrow. And that's what Solomon's saying. Listen, all your labors, don't try to find satisfaction and fulfillment there, because all of that has a fleeting nature about it due to the economy we live in under the sun. And know what he says about this economy. There's no prejudice about it. There's no prejudice in this perpetual loop we find ourselves in under the sun with our labors. Look what he says in verse 8. For what hath the wise more than the fool? What hath the poor than to know how to walk before the living? What's he saying? There's no prejudice. Solomon utilizes what he has said in chapter number 5, verse 9, all the way through chapter 6, verse 6, to remind us again that each person is subject to the same human economy. Wise or fool, poor or rich, no one escapes the realities that he has presented to us the last two chapters as we know them in our scriptures. And it isn't prejudicial at all. The point is not only that the wise don't necessarily get wealthy, but no less that they are bound to be driven by appetites just like the fool, just like the poor. Loving material goods, hoarding them for oneself, seeking satisfaction from them will still result in the same emptiness. Nothing can truly satisfy apart from the God in heaven who desires a relationship with humanity under the sun. I want us to think about this tonight. He says it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how you want to behave yourself, even if you know how to have harmony with one another. And as he says, the poor here know how to walk amongst one another. In other words, they have a harmony with humanity around them, or they could anyway. He's making it clear, nobody in any situation escapes the somewhat lackluster attempts of human effort and human labor. The only difference between the wise and the foolish is how they'll deal with these basic appetites. But Solomon reminds the reader that no pursuit, material wealth, prestige, physical satisfaction, sex, hoarding, acquiring knowledge, living a long life, none of these can truly bring the pursuer contentment in this life. All labor's results are lacking. And my friend, they're that way on purpose. None of your labors are to provide the satisfaction and contentment that God alone provides in the economy that He has created. And so when you and I, when His readers would attempt it through any of the avenues that He has outlined in chapter 5 now into chapter 6, really on the whole of the book, when we would pursue these items, they'll never bring satisfaction because labor is lackluster. They don't have the ability to produce that which is holy to God and satisfying in His economy. Rich, poor, fool, or wise, the same economy applies to all. So my friends, labor, it is very much a lackluster event. Laboring is good. Laboring is God ordained. But the results in man's economy are never to be what bring you satisfaction and contentment. They lead to a very lackluster result in many times and in many cases. So what does Solomon warn us or caution us or encourage us to do about this? Look what he says in verse 9. He says, labor for what you can see, don't chase after what you can't. Secondly, labor for what you can see, don't chase after what you can't. Look what he says in verse number 9. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. Solomon grants us his perspective on laboring by starting with the word better. In other words, what he will say is agreeable and pleasant for us to not only understand, but then for us to act upon. And in giving a comparison in the verse, it highlights the value of the first sentiment as opposed to the worthlessness of the pursuit of the second sentiment. Now, before a reader or you or I would maybe accuse Solomon of being a critic or being a cynic or being a fatalist, he grants us perspective on what to do. So, if anyone in humanity is prone or even subject to wasted living, how do we safeguard ourselves against that? What is better? He says what's better is the sight of our eyes rather than the wandering of our desires. You see, the sight of our eyes isn't referencing the ability to see or even what a person looks like. It speaks of what one can behold plainly. Whatever you have in your inventory of what you currently possess, tangible or intangible, what you have should be what you are thankful for, content with, and letting be utilized by God. That's what's better. Or if we could say it because he's given a comparison, that's what is the best. If labor is lackluster and it is always going to be in this perpetual loop, then how can I find any level of contentment in this kind of a system, knowing what I'm doing today is only going to get used up tomorrow? Just be thankful. Even as he closed out chapter 5, life's good if you'll let it be. Be thankful to God for what you have. Be thankful for what he has given you rather than do the opposite, which is the constant pursuit of the next thing. Know what he says. It's better to have the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. The word for wandering here gives the idea of traveling from one location to the next. Changing. And know what he links this to, the wandering of desire. The Hebrew word here is indicating the part of us that we think, feel, and ultimately choose with. So think what Solomon's saying here. He's saying it's better to be. It's the best thing. It's the right thing. Because of the lackluster results of labor, to be thankful for what you do have. Not always pursuing the very next thing. Not having this wandering desire that goes from place to place to place. The constant pursuit of the next thing. What is Solomon saying? Don't be a slave to your whims. If you're a slave to your whims, you will always have that wandering desire, the next thing. And so you labor, but you know what you find out? The appetite's not filled. Oh, I had to do this just to survive this, or I had to do this so I could pay for that, or I had to do this to try to get that position or that promotion. And all that labor, though it may have some substance in the economy of man, will never truly be satisfying because it doesn't have the capacity to be satisfying. And so Solomon says, a way to safeguard yourself against this futility in your labor or the lifestyle devoted and consumed by this idea of fulfillment from labor is to be thankful for what you can see, not chasing after what you cannot see. Note what he says at the end of verse 9. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. What's Solomon saying? This is a difficult statement that even seems paradoxical in some ways, though it's nonetheless true. On the one hand, the proverb quoted suggests that we enjoy material things, the sight of the eyes, and that it's better than the endless pursuit of some dream, because even if that dream should be realized, there's no satisfaction. We just yearn for more and yearn for more and yearn for more. If we won't heed his help with what is better, then we are guaranteed what is worst. The vanity and the vexation of constantly chasing that which we will never truly have, and as Solomon has already told us, what will never be truly satisfying. Again, he desires us to consider the calm and the satisfaction found in contentment, found in thanksgiving, found in faith in who our God is and what he has given us. So what's Solomon saying? Stop the chasing. Stop the wanting. Stop the lusting. Stop the coveting. Solomon here asserts that it's better to be satisfied with what one has, whether it be money or whether it be knowledge, than to be continually driven to obtain more and more. Again, this is not a moratorium against possessing items, because Solomon has spoken about that in the right way, in a right context. It's not against pursuing education. It's not against positioning oneself as a steward. The warning is this: don't be possessed by any of those pursuits. Don't let those things overtake your heart and shape your life and become your sole purpose or motivation. It may be a difficult statement because it does seem paradoxical. I do need to be a good steward. God has given us good gifts to enjoy. I can have the capacity as a good steward to enjoy greater or more of these good gifts. And yet Solomon says, don't go chasing after them. And so in one way, it does feel like it's a two-way message, as if don't, but do, but do, but don't. And so Solomon says, don't be possessed by him. And he gives us lastly tonight the warning about why not to be possessed by him. Thirdly tonight, note what he says in verses 10 through 12. Our limited evaluation of labor and life make it a necessity for us to see labor in the proper frame or in the proper context. Note what he says here in verse 10 through 12. He closes this section with rhetorical questions. He says in verse 10, that which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, here come the questions. What is man the better? For who knoweth what is good for man in this life? All the days of his life are vain, which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? I want you to see Solomon closes this section with some rhetorical questions in a veiled fashion to draw us to an obvious conclusion. He wants us to see an important point here about how limited our evaluations of labor in this life are. In a sense, he's pleading with his readers in a backwards way to look to the one who is able to give them greater understanding beyond themselves. And so he talks to us, thirdly, about our limited evaluation of labor and of life. Note what he says here. That which hath been named already, it is man. The first part of this verse in verse number 10, it's frankly verse 10, let me just give you some insight. These are the kind of verses as a pastor you just like, this is fantastic. Because even the Hebrew scholars disagree about what this even means. And so, I will just tell you right now. Verse 10, there are as many theories and thoughts about the interpretation. And I was telling Pastor David, maybe if all of us spoke Hebrew and we lived back then, it would be 100% helpful to us. And it is still helpful, but I will just tell you, there is some disagreement about how it actually is rendered for us in English. And so we want to look at verse 10 and look what it says. That which hath been named is already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. The first part of this verse reminds the reader to reflect upon human history, even what's currently taking place even in their time. It has been named. What does he say here? That which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Most agree that what Solomon's saying here is that he is saying that which hath been is named already, it is man. That he's saying all that we understand and identify and has been characterized, he's speaking here about human history. He's speaking here about all that has led up to this point. It's been identified, it's been categorized, it's been observed. And so the current state of humanity is just another thread woven into the whole of human history. The thousands of years prior led us to the point that they were at, and who's going to continue to be on them, all the way to our point now. And here's what he says to help us understand our limited view of human history. Note what he says. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Any member of the human race may desire to argue with the way humanity's history is unfolding. But at the end of the day, you're not going to win that argument. You may not agree with what has taken place in human history. You may not desire what has taken place in human history. You may think you need to do this pursuit because of what you think about your place in human history. But I want to tell you tonight, no matter how you contend about it, there's one mightier than you that you will not overcome. You won't be the exception. You won't be the one that changes the course of human history from going in the economy that God has under the sun with you and I. And so note what happens. To fight this means you would be fighting somebody mightier than yourself. Note what he says. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? Some view the many things as meaning an argument of words, while others state that Solomon is speaking of different avenues man can try to take to broaden their understanding in what's taking place and try to make their labor count for something, if we can say it that way. Yet we're reminded that such endeavors are hampered by our limitations. If you thought that you would be the exception to chasing these pursuits in your life, if you thought labor would actually be able to bring you some level of satisfaction, you say, you know what? I see what human history is. I see what it's led up to this point, but it will be different with me. He says, you're contending with what you don't have the power to contend with. But he said also, all the avenues you may take or all the words you may say to try to convince someone or something otherwise, all that will end up in is what? Vanity. And he says, what is man the better for it? Efforts would just produce vanity. There is still no solution from doing those things. So what does he say lastly tonight in these rhetorical questions? Who knows and who can tell? Reminding us of our limitations, Solomon again points to them by asking some daunting questions. Fellas, let's move to the next slide. There we go. Thank you. And so he goes here to verse number 12, and note what he says. For who knoweth what is good for man in this life? All the days of his vain life which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? Solomon gives us some daunting questions here to answer. He says, who knows and who can tell? First, in the light of how empty or meaningless one's life can be due to its brevity, hence the word shadow, how can one know what is best in terms of life's choices? In other words, Solomon's saying, if your labor is futile, and it is frustrating, and it does seem unsatisfying, you have a short window of life, you won't have all the answers, all your days will be spent in what would be considered vanity, and it would go by like that as a shadow very quickly. Solomon's not trying to make us be discouraged about life. What he's trying to point to is, again, our finite, frail limitations in this life. If you think, or I think, that this will be our happiness or that'll be our satisfaction, and it's contrary to not only what Solomon has written, but the totality of what the Scriptures have written, you and I will not be the exception to the rule to fight that, to buck that trend. We will not be the ones to change that. We would only find that in this life, we still don't have the resources, understanding to satisfy our longing. So he asks you, who knows? Who knows what's good for man in this life? Do you, basically, he's asking? Do I? Could I be the one to give you the answers that you seek after to make your labor rewarding? He goes beyond that. Note what he says. Who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? Solomon goes on to say, let's say you could even go into the future, or somebody from the future traveled back to you and told you what would take place the next 10, 20, 50, or 100 years after you passed away. Do you think that would equip you to make the decisions better about finding satisfaction through labor, through wealth, through material pursuits, through relationships? Do you think if you had that kind of insight, you'd be able to find satisfaction? Solomon's asking rhetorical questions for a reason. Though he's doing it implicitly, the whole purpose of this section is to draw the reader to look to the only person that can grant them answers, the only person who can grant them satisfaction. And who would that be? It's not Solomon. It's not our own selves as the reader. He's implicitly drawing us with these questions, all of our existence being what it is, to see, you know what? I don't have the answers I need. I have tried it my way. I have sought this or pursued this motivation. At the end of the day, I've still been wanting. I've still been lacking. I've still been very unsatisfied. And so I must look to the only one, because I am limited in my evaluation of not only my labor, but in my evaluation of this life. What's he trying to help us see? Beyond that, if we would fear God and align ourselves with His commandments, we'd find scope beyond our keyhole vantage point and purpose beyond our subjective whims, which he's trying to guard us against. Solomon's questions beg what should be the obvious answer. When he asks, who could contend with somebody mightier? Not us. The mighty person that we need to submit to is God. Now, who can know these things? Not us. The only person who knows them is who? Our God. Who can tell us what's best for man? The obvious answer, the God in heaven who is wanting those of humanity under the sun to look back to Him, to find Him fulfilling and satisfying. The overarching narrative is Solomon drawing us to the very conclusion that we need to come to, which is God's economy should be heeded and not disputed. We should fear Him, keep His commandments, walk forward with Him. It's what He desires for our life. When we labor for anything else, it will always end up being vain. Because to some degree, frankly, that's the cycle of it. That's the nature when you live for the here and now. That's the nature when you pursue this world as your satisfaction. Nothing, fleeting, nothing, no level of contentment or fulfillment or satisfaction will be lasting because we're laboring for the wrong things or we're looking to our labor as a wrong item. You know, I swept that floor every day, only to come back in and have to sweep that floor again and again. This went on for, I don't know, a few weeks, sweeping this silly floor every single day. And I finally said to my boss, I asked him, why do you have me sweep the floor at the end of the day, knowing within 12 hours it will be filthy again because of those silly doors mostly, but then also just our in and out business? You know what his answer was back to me? I like a clean floor. I just like it. It makes me happy when I walk out the door to see that whole barn completely clean, everything stacked, everything put away, and no, I didn't have to do none of it. It just makes me happy. I had to chuckle about it a little bit, but you know what I thought about? I didn't struggle to do the floor anymore. I knew it made my boss happy. He's the one who paid my wages. I could work in that economy just fine, right? I didn't have to know the reasoning, but his reasoning sure did help me in the pursuit of my labors. Listen, at a far greater level, can I encourage us about something tonight? Ground your labors in this life, not in the pursuit of earthly longings. I mean, we as a culture are overgone with materialism and narcissism. You know, we are pursuing that 401k benchmark. We're pursuing those stock options. We're pursuing that car to be paid off. We're pursuing that new improvement at the house. We're pursuing that next trip. We're pursuing that next relationship. We're just overcome with pursuit of all these items that don't reflect a fear of God and a keeping of His commandments. And Solomon's trying to help us recognize all those will always end the same way because we as limited, finite creatures really don't know how to evaluate life. I don't know how to evaluate it. You don't know how to evaluate it. Oh, I've been alive 30 years. Well, I've been married for 29 years. I've been employed for 42 years. What Solomon's trying to help us recognize is this. All our pursuits that are apart from this kind of grounding and motivation and understanding will always lead to the same destination, which is unfulfilling. They will always end in some manner of vanity. And so tonight, my friend, he warns us, and he wants us to take a look at our labors so that we would labor for what lasts and not after earthly longings. Tonight, my friend, I don't know what you're laboring after. I don't know what your motivations or pursuits are, but I would just challenge you. Whatever they are, identify them, filter them, and then align them with fearing God, keeping His commandments, finding Him as your satisfaction and contentment, not trying to fill it with other things or other people. These items may in themselves not be bad or wrong. He spent a whole chapter and a half saying it's not bad, it's not wrong. But when they possess you, it sure is. And so be possessed by our God and be utilized for His glory. Father, I ask that you'd help each of us this evening as we consider our labor, that we would consider who we are in you, what we're able to do for you, how to look at our labor and consider our desires and our pursuits, and put all those things in its proper perspective. As for any man or woman in here that may be trying to find some level of satisfaction, they'd be reminded tonight all our labors end in some level of vanity. And so some of those are needed just to survive in this earthly existence, but it doesn't mean we have to be bound to them. And some of those are very appealing and seem like they'll be satisfying, and yet we're just very limited in our understanding. And so help us to be thankful for what we have, and then, Father, help us to look to you for your evaluations of life and of labor. I ask that each of us this evening would consider what we're pursuing, what we're possessed by, and who we're pleasing. Lord, I ask that you help each of us for your glory to be displayed in our lives. In Christ's name, amen. Let's take a moment tonight with our heads bowed, our eyes closed. I just want you to consider what you're laboring after and what you're laboring for. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed, and I want to challenge each head of household to think about what your pursuits reveal. I want to challenge each of you young people to consider what you think is valuable. And then may we, like Solomon, come back and ask ourselves, do I really know what's best? How could I know that? I'm so limited and frail. Can I really discern what's best for my life? Will this actually produce what I think it will in my life? The Lord's the one who answers all those questions. So tonight, if there's some area of our life that needs adjusting, some pursuit we need adjusted, may we do that in this moment.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey.
Let's stand tonight as Brother Nate goes to lead us in a song of dismissal. And so, as we're standing, grab your hymn books. Brother Nate, what are we going to sing?
Let's go ahead and sing that song, page 196 in your hymnal. We'll dismiss with this great song, Trust and Obey. When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. May the Lord bless you in your week. You are dismissed.